Um, Bonjour, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jen Milguy. I'm Director of IP and Partnerships at Digital, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar, Guarding Innovation, Empowering Technology Builders to Shape Their Innovation Journey. As myself and much of the digital team are based in Vancouver, we respectfully acknowledge that we work, learn, and live on the traditional ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to attendees afterwards. If at any point during this session you have a question, please type it into the chat and we'll address them during the Q&A portion at the end. It's wonderful having attendees from across the country for this month's webinar. And whether you're a returning participant or first time in joining, we're happy to have you join us in this Thought Leadership Power Hour. Next slide, please. IP is a strategic business asset shaping market entry, valuation, and growth stages. And integrating this mindset early on enables innovators to gain not only safeguards, but also a roadmap to strategic readiness, competitive positioning, and long-term value creation. Lockstep with this mindset is the imperative in securing the right IP advice at the right time, advice that is qualified, independent, and responsive to the realities of the innovation and business goals, and also, as well, the complexities of the innovation lifecycle accelerates poorly designed decisions, which can create innovation friction, delay, or even failure. Over these next 60 minutes, we'll explore common risks, including disclosure mistakes, weak filing strategies, and fraud, the potential impacts of an over-reliance on funding pathways, generic service models, or unsafe AI tools, and practical steps that innovators and organizations can take for an active role in advancing their long-term interests, and a Q&A portion to close us out. Next slide, please. At the heart of Canada's global innovation clusters is collaborative innovation, fueling the creation of scalable technologies with global reach. Digital's IP and data strategy turns ambition into action, helping Canadian companies build, own, and retain high-value IP that drives inclusive growth. Today's thought leadership session is one of the many ways in which we're raising IP literacy and strengthening portfolios by empowering Canadian innovators to generate, protect, and strategically deploy their IP. Next slide, please. I have the pleasure of introducing today's guests. Please join me in welcoming Susan Tees and Judah Stravchinsky. Susan is a Veteran 1 Class 1 patent agent with over 25 years experience in Canadian and U.S. patent law and practice, including establishing IP practices in several Canadian startups, patent preparation and prosecution, and acting as in-house counsel for 2 IPOs and an M&A. Her experience spans industries which include drug manufacturing, DNA constructs, and personal health appliances. Currently, as IP Director at New Ventures BC, she promotes intellectual property initiatives in BC, including IP Pathways, an education series designed to equip startups and scale-ups with the fundamentals of IP strategy, and business growth. And Judah is the CEO and Registrar of the College of Patent Agents and Trademark Agents, otherwise known as SAPATA, the independent public interest regulator of patent agents and trademark agents in Canada. A lawyer and frequent speaker on professional regulation and risk, prior to joining SAPATA, he held roles with LawPro, leading the Claims Prevention and Risk Management Initiative for Ontario lawyers, as well as Policy Counsel at the Law Society of Ontario, advising on key issues facing the legal professions, including access to justice, professional regulation, consumer protection issues, and practice at 2 boutique litigation law firms. And with that, let's begin today's discussion. Susan, I'd like to kick it off with you as a level set. And if we're looking at the context of today's discussion, how do you define IP?
Well, despite you giving me time to prepare for this, I don't have a nice, concise answer. Intellectual property is so important in the value of today's companies. I like to think of these different, what I'm going to show you in these, we have a couple of slides here. These are different aspects of the unifying thing that is intellectual property. Intellectual property falls within intangible assets. which is an even bigger category. But for the purpose of this chat, just to the big five types of IP are copyrights, trademarks, industrial designs, patents, and trade secrets. And as you see from the column, some do and some don't require secrecy, which is why it's so important to develop an IP strategy early in a company's experience. Next slide. I've added a few less well-known or maybe less obvious types of IP. I know that Jen has already, as digital is big on educating the members about data and its place in the IP spectrum. There's also some less well-known types of IP like plant breeders' rights, which are more useful perhaps in agriculture. For technical side, there's standard essential patents, which are patents, but there's a different process for getting them to be a standard essential patent. You can't say enough about reputation and goodwill. I think it's so important for all companies. It is like being walking confidently down a dark street. If you have that look of someone who knows what they're doing, a company that knows what it's doing and is doing the right thing, you will have more support from the public. And I think that's important. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you, Susan. And Judah, as we also kind of look at this discussion that's going to unfold over these next 60 minutes, is there sort of, a common myth that you invite the audience to keep in mind as we go through today's discussion?
Yeah, I think we're starting as a country and as individual startups, scale-ups, entrepreneurs to see the importance and the essential need to reflect on intellectual property. What I think we're struggling with at times is as we move and business moves fast, intellectual property is at times seen as a one and done part of your business strategy, and that's a mistake. We need to, just as we think about our business strategy and pivot and move and make it dynamic and grow, we need to think carefully about what is our IP approach currently, and what is it that we are trying to achieve for our business through IP strategy and through IP protection. And that will shift over time. And it's important to know that the decisions we make at outset are going to impact on what kind of a ride we get downstream as well. So let's set up for success, but also reflect on the need for an evergreen initiative to our IP maintenance.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And I think just we're so lucky to have you both today from the seats that you're in and kind of what you're sort of seeing across the ecosystem and how you're going to be able to both kind of, impart sort of these different, from the strategy side of things, but also sort of the mindfulness, right? That regardless of kind of where you are in sector or sort of that maturity of the things sort of to kind of to be aware of. So on that, Susan, I'm going to kick it off, the next question sort of to you as we look at programs that, have been established that are out there that help innovators, access early IP support. And so, as both a patent agent that's licensed by SAPATA and someone who is also very familiar sort of with programming, why do you sort of see funding as important for IP?
Well, as a patent agent, probably even more so than as the New Ventures BC IP director, I have seen so many companies that just don't have the means to engage in those first essential steps of IP preparation. As I said earlier, IP strategy should be an early step, partly because it's going to define how you're going to perform your business so that it provides that advantage to the IP, but also in the case of publication and premature disclosure, which is unfortunately still very common, despite the knowledge that many companies have about disclosure being bad for patenting. So that's why I think this funding is wonderful, this early stage funding. It allows companies to get started with a really a professional IP agent or lawyer in most cases to develop a strategy that they can then use as a roadmap to go forward.
And then kind of fleshing that out a little bit more as we look at sort of, the different sort of programming and how it can help that early support, sort of on the flip side of that, is there sort of, a way in which sort of funding can unintentionally sort of veer innovators, off track, that you might be able to speak to us about?
I'm so glad you asked. Just because when we see some of the grant applications, it's clear that I think this is the grant shouldn't be leading the IP strategy or the business strategy. And sometimes we can see from the grant application of the quotes that they are trying to spend every dollar that's available. It looks better to us when we see a really reasoned application. And I'm not the sole judge or anything like that, but when we see an application that has the texture of an application that is as minimal as possible, as if it was their own money that they were spending. They are trying to get something very important for their company done. That I think is something for applicants and companies to think of, that we're aware, we can see if you're asking for money just because it's there. We want to see you asking for a meaningful lift that will help your company.
And I guess a little bit further, I mean, we'll go into this discussion a little bit sort of deeper over this next while, but I guess also the part that, for example, in your lens from patent sides, patents might not be right for everybody, in terms of what folks are seeing, innovators to try to access some of this funding and leveraging that. So there might also be sort of unintentional sort of pathways they steer themselves on, maybe more so than not. Yeah.
Yes, and I ask the practitioners to also, I mean, I'm not trying to be anybody's friends here quite clearly, but to also be aware that because patents are your call, doesn't mean that every business needs a patent. And to be frank with the companies and say, okay, well, in this area, patents aren't very successful. It certainly isn't off the list, but to guide them more towards trademarks, industrial design even, and that kind of layered, multifactorial type of IP strategy that might serve them better.
Perfect. Okay. That kind of segues sort of, I'd like to move it now to you, Judah, a little bit from your seat. I mean, from both of your seats in your seat, you've no doubt sort of seen a diversity of ways that innovators are engaging on issues that are related to IP strategy, sort of as you sort of, outlaid sort of in the beginning part of our segment. From your seat, what should founders, innovators, however we, kind of, classify the group, be doing to take charge of IP strategy rather than outsourcing all the thinking?
Well, I think that last part is exactly right. You hire a professional not to just build something for you and be done with it. You can't just outsource your full thinking. It's your strategy. It's your business. It's your moonshot. And so they're your thought partner. But the buck stops with you always. Even when you have a professional who, has these heightened duties to act, to exercise their skill and judgment and share their knowledge in order to protect you as best as they can. And they have lots of ethical obligations, and they tend, for the most part, to act at the highest levels of professionalism. But at the end of the day, you're the one who's responsible. You're the one who sets your journey. And so you need to still own your own IP. So this becomes a very difficult balancing act for some founders who know they need to do this and maybe haven't fully wrapped their heads around the importance of the intangible assets and intangibles in our economy. But it's a hard area to grow through and commercialize. It's a hard area to decide how you're thinking about your IP strategically. It's hard to land on which direction you're going to be heading in and why, but you need to spend that time and you need to own that yourself with the experts around the tables. So I think that's the starting point is just like, look, there are some startups who will go to a university program or will hire a consultant to help them build a business plan. right? Like if you're a technical expert or you have a moonshot idea, but you don't know how to execute it, if you've talked to somebody who can help you set up a business plan, that's great. But you wouldn't expect that that person then owns your business for you, right? They've given you a tool. And when you work with your professionals, they're trying to enable you with the right with advice, with options, and sometimes with a tool, with an intangible asset that you might be able to convert either to commercialize or to defend yourself from possible attacks in the marketplace.
So two things I'd just like to kind of flesh out before we kind of continue on a little bit is, something one that you said, around kind of the outsourcing and what Susan started us off with at the beginning, right? Where there are certain things that, where is there secrecy? Is there, sort of things that you need to kind of hold on to wraps on, right? So is that, as innovators are having these conversations and potentially outsourcing, are they outsourcing opportunity that they have? I think also two, from your lens, are you seeing a shift in the dynamic of the innovators in terms of that mindset? Are you starting to see that change, that there is more of a concerted effort to not want to take more of that control and understand how much in the driver's seat they should be and need to be? I'm just kind of curious from your lens.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, and this is in professional services generally, is and it starts with Google, right? We've got this amazing mug that says that lawyers used to buy that says your Google search is not the same as my law degree. And now we could add, your Gen I product is not the same as my drafting skills, right? I mean, there are values to having human professionals help you along the way. But I think we've seen a shift in professional services generally, where the professionals, it is expected that they will spend more time getting to know you before giving you advice. And it is expected that those in areas where they may seek intellectual property services are going to need to do a bit more homework for themselves at the outset to think through where are the areas that they need support. And that's being supported by groups like Digital and groups like Intellectual Property Ontario or New Ventures BC, where there is education now so that founders and startups can move along their IP journey faster so that you're spending less time using at times expensive professionals to give you advice that's a 101 about what you're facing. So webinars like this that just even introduce, here are some of the areas where intellectual property can add value. Here are some of the things you want to consider. That helps people have, just better, call it public education understandings of intellectual property so that you can be better prepared to go talk to a professional who in turn isn't necessarily, as some have in the past, just being there as widget makers. You came to a patent agent, I'm going to give you a patent. Our approach now is to ask patent agents to consider the strategic objectives of the client. And not every client is going to need a patent that moment that they come to meet you. Sometimes the advice might be, this is not patentable. Sometimes the advice might be, have you considered these other ways of trying to protect your IP?
Mm.
Sometimes the discussion might be, this is really awesome theoretical R&D you've done, but you're not ready to even understand which direction you want to take this to market with. I know everyone says it's really important you file early, but you don't know what you want to file for. So maybe let's hold and let's keep talking. So there are lots of options that professionals can help you with, but there's a bridge here that's being strengthened through core education so that we're able to talk to each other better from professional to innovator, innovator to professional.
That's awesome. Thank you. And before we jump in a bit further, I want to sort of flesh out a bit more around Zapata. Susan, was there anything else kind of you wanted to add to this piece? I think, yeah, Judah, you've nailed it. It's everyone's in the journey together, literally, in ways in terms of what success looks like. And Susan, I just wanted to see if there's anything you wanted to add to the outsourcing of the thinking that might be top of mind still for you.
I do. I wonder, it might be, I know this was on our plan to talk about a little bit, and something we've seen in some of the grant applications. Uh, it's not clear sometimes to the public or to the companies who are a correct practitioner, who are practitioners with training, and with insurance, for example. And although I'm not a stuffy-minded person, I believe people can try to do things themselves. I'm not a big supporter of people misleading. Uh, companies into believing that they can file patents for them when they're really just experts. They may be very good, and I don't deny that, but CPATA has a really nice registry of agents and trademark agents, patent agents and trademark agents, that you can go and check and make sure that they are somebody who can help you in Canada to file a patent or file a trademark, for example. And I think that it sounds like kind of old-fashioned of me to bring that up, but that's something that I think the public should be aware of, that there is a registry to check, and there are practitioner people out there who are not maybe who they say they are.
Well, thank you. You've slipstreamed beautifully sort of into the next
Oh,
part,
good.
kind of towards Judah about speaking exactly to this, that, amidst all of the business, and innovation challenges, that innovators are facing, as part of this, there's also navigational challenges when looking to turn to experts, right? So, Judah, maybe you can kind of walk us through sort of what Susan has sort of started to walk us down, with an understanding of the different types of providers,
For
working
sure.
with the right professionals. What are some of the, risks and challenges to consider? Because there are, as we understand, unregulated and regulated providers, and there's a lot of nomenclature that's kind of swirling around that maybe you can help us to demystify a bit.
Sure. Let's just talk about the marketplace to start. Their intellectual property is very valuable. It drives a lot of our economy these days. And so as a result, it's understandable that we have lots of different people who offer services that relate to intellectual property. There are some who do this as consultants. They may call themselves something, but they may even be good at what they do. There are people who may call themselves intellectual property strategists, for example, depending on where they've learned about intellectual property, the businesses they've worked with, the experiences they've had in life. They may be able to provide value add for some clients, but they are doing so in what we would call an unregulated space. Whether or not they have insurance would be a question to ask somebody who is not a regulated professional. What sort of experience they have for which they have now called themselves an expert or offer certain services. These would be questions consumers would have to ask. There are other areas like around IP financing, where certain financial institutions or consultants are out there to try to value your IP or leverage your IP or sell your IP or try to get you a next round of funding based on your current IP trajectory. Again, there may be some who have credentials or who have business experiences or an MBA at the end of their title or what have you, but those aren't necessarily going to be regulated areas. So you need to just ask questions of those types of experts, where they've got their experiences, how they've come into the space, what happens if things go wrong, what sort of protections might be available to me, and why should I be working with you? So you just need to govern yourself according to the understanding of the services they provide. Then there are professionals who offer services in intellectual property, and there are different types. The two that typically are involved are lawyers and patent agents and trademark agents. So the agent professions are the ones who do certain exclusive work in front of the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. They also tend to have networks to help those who might be seeking to file patents or trademarks, not just in Canada, but in other markets where Canadian innovators may wish to protect their intellectual property. It's a very global field. Patent agents and trademark agents usually have foreign agents in foreign markets who they work closely with for Canadians looking to expand abroad. They also do work around intellectual property strategy and can do some preliminary assessment work with people who come in who are trying to understand what options may be available to them. Intellectual property lawyers may also be agents and can do all of that work if they are agents. If they are lawyers, though, lawyers typically are able to work on things like contract agreements, mergers and acquisitions, or litigation that's going to a court or arbitration. So there is overlap between what agents do all day and what lawyers do all day. But if it's about actually moving a patent forward in the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, or a trademark moving forward through the Canadian uh, prosecution steps before the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. Those would be the areas of regulation for the College of Patent Agents and Trademark Agents. So it's really important to know that there is both regulated and non-regulated professionals, that they cover a broad terrain of assistance available, and just to know that some of them you can with the regulated group, be it a lawyer or an agent, you can go to public registers to learn whether they are in good standing, to make sure that whoever has come to you and by email or whether you've heard of somebody, you can check that they're in good standing. And Susan's right. These are your core first steps you should be taking. Just like if you were going to meet with a surgeon, you might be checking to see whether there's any discipline history against that surgeon and to make sure they really are surgeons. And frighteningly enough, according to recent reports, sometimes people are conducting surgery without a license in this country. That's why we have a regulator in part, is to make sure that we know that who we're dealing with is actually licensed to do the work.
And I know, post webinar, we will share sort of, further updates around sort of, the Zapata registry and, some of those pieces. But I'm just wondering sort of, at a high level, if you can just kind of walk us through, if somebody were wanting to sort of do that search, like there's quite a lot of, detailed information that
Sure.
they can find. And I think one thing I know it in a conversation, previously that we've had, that sometimes a flag in a register may not necessarily be a negative thing, right? It might have to
Yep.
do with somebody's experience level or how many years they're practicing. So maybe if you can just take a moment to kind of help to demystify that, yeah.
Sure. Why don't I'm going to ask for a share request and see if I can put something right on the screen. And if not, I'll just walk us through. But here, let me take us to our Find an Agent page. If you were to go to Zapata's webpage, right at the start here, you can see on the left it says find an agent, and this is available in English or in French. So if you go to find an agent, you can click on our public register, although this page does give you some information for those who are visual learners about how to use it. But let's cheat and move right ahead. So there are ways to search. And you can search if you know you're looking for a patent, probably, or you're not. If you're not sure, you can search the whole register by name, or you can just search the entire list. You can search by geography. So, example, if we put in Vancouver, and apologies to the rest of British Columbia, I respect that you are a diverse and large province, but let's just go with one area. We can find a couple of hundred people who provide services out of BC. And the wonderful thing about, our post-pandemic delivery of legal services and professional services and agent services is that we don't necessarily have to be uh, limited by geography, but it certainly does help that if you can meet somebody face to face, there's a way to find who's in your area. We can then refine that further. We can see, is somebody a patent agent or a trademark agent? We can search by employer. We can also search by language. So let's say we wanted to see if there's, I don't know, somebody who can speak. Uh, let's let's go with just Chinese generally. Oh, I don't think oh, maybe I did refine it. No, I did not. But in any event, if I had actually clicked that, it would have refined the Vancouver-based people who could speak on this basis. We can also refine to who's taking new clients. Now, this is as defined by the agents themselves, and you can see there are nearly 100 here. And the reason some aren't taking new clients is because they already work for certain institutional clients and are trying to avoid conflicts of interest by taking new people in. But this helps us to avoid navigational concerns of spending time reaching out to people who look on first blush to be really well suited to our work, but it turns out they're not able to take you on as a client at the moment. So that search function, you can even search by industry. I didn't go through all of it today. The industry indicators are from some government ways of categorizing it. Typologies all often change. So you might not be a railway baron and need to search by railways, but we have railways there in case you're in that space. But there are some other ones around pharmaceuticals and other core industries where it may fit for you. But if you're finding it's too tight on that, you can Rest assured also that patent agents and trademark agents do have the ethical ability to talk to a client and say, wow, you're at the forefront of AI, of Gen AI, or of pharmaceutical. Here's where my knowledge is right now in this space. I could learn this area with you, but we're going to have to talk about what that would look like because I can certainly draft and I certainly have an understanding of IP generally and how that could fit, but I may need to learn more about your industry or where you fit within it before I serve you. So don't feel curtailed necessarily, but the point more generally is that we've tried to create a consumer-friendly register that isn't just are you suspended, are you in good standing, but also where are you able to serve and how. Lastly, you're right. There are some notifications when you go down to individual records. We have a category called C3, for example, which just means they're a trainee. And so a trainee is in supervised practice. So you may want to know who their supervisor is then if it turns out that they've come up. And sometimes we'll have a supervisor who, I mean, Susan's a patent agent. Susan, I won't pick on Susan, but a patent agent might have a background in biochem and might typically focus on pharmaceutical or on areas where that historic knowledge will help them draft on behalf of clients. But that doesn't prevent that person from helping somebody else who's up and coming who might have a background in Gen AI. And so, just because a C3 has certain technical knowledge but may not be fully able to fly solo yet doesn't necessarily mean you rule them out as a potential assistant, but you'll want to know who's supervising them as well.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you, Jude. And I think it really also hammers home this point, right? That, provider fit, sort of becomes critical, right? In terms of the organization, the founder, and, what they're choosing. So you've kind of, walked us through, right? What are some of those pieces around, that independence that the provider understands things. And to your point, sometimes, again, it's part of the journey. Like there may be somebody that one want is gravitated to work with because they are going to do that together. Like you said, they might not be a specialist in area X, but there is a passion or a connection there to say, look, I'm going to go through this with you. So it really is that part of your journey. And now they also have ways to kind of search it. You both have kind of talked about you've said it, and I also will kind of pass it a bit now to Susan to kind of flesh out a bit around Gen AI. There are things around, AI enabled tools. There is oftentimes false confidence, whether that's on the person that's doing the typing or what is being spit out and the interpretation of that. Judah, that you no doubt have seen that we will jump in on you with. And Susan, I want to kind of get to you a little bit around this. What do you see as the risks of using AI tools in the IP context in light of today's discussion?
It's AI is a very attractive tool, and it actually is much better than I would have assumed before I tried it myself. So I just want to start with that. I'm friendly. I am AI friendly. I have a reputation for disliking AI generated commentary on LinkedIn, and that's just a fact. But the harms that it might cause, one of them is that many of the AI tools, and I'm not up on all their terms and conditions, but there's a possibility that when you're putting in your confidential trade secret idea for, hey, is this patentable, that it will take that and send that up to the cloud and share that with everyone. And someone may get that as a search result for some question they're going to ask. So that is a concern I have about using AI for your confidential information. Um, the other harm is, well, the second official harm is or concern is that AI cannot be an inventor and cannot be an author. So there's suddenly an ownership question, or a who how do I protect this? Um, and that's something that needs to be part of your IP strategy. It doesn't mean you dismiss the use of AI. It's just that there are approaches to using AI that will be more wise, such as keeping track of how much human uh, contribution and oversight is going on. If you record those, that would be very helpful. Um, And the final harm is just the reliance on a muscle that isn't necessarily serving the animal, which is your business. So you're using it looks really good. Like you get a result from AI, it looks like, heck, that looks like a patent application. I spent a lot of years learning how to do that, and you can just do that in a couple of seconds. But the human oversight, the judgment, the how that fits in the big spectrum of what's best for your company, that isn't there with AI, and I don't think it ever will be. I think that there's nothing that beats the understanding that two human beings have for each other, and the motivation that one human being will have for protecting and taking care of another human being is not something that AI can do.
You know, if I could jump in on Gen AI, and we're
Yeah.
also seeing some questions come in around it. You know, Gen AI, some of the use cases are incredible. Don't get us wrong. I think Susan and I are both fans of some of its applicability. What we're flagging is the risk that if you use it on your confidential stuff, you risk not just your confidentiality around it, but the narrower possibility is if you are subject to litigation with disclosure, if you put that stuff into chat or into any other Gen AI, the current early case law is that it is no longer considered confidential and is disclosable. You have lost your privilege by giving it to outside your bubble. So you need to be very careful, especially at those early outset stages, in considering how you're using your data, how you're using your inputs, how you're using that, and who you're sharing it with. So that's very important to keep in mind. But, you know, Susan's right that if, you know, there's also this garbage in, garbage out risk. And it's not to say that AI isn't capable of great things, and you can have a great, you know, draft of a filing created by AI in seconds, but it may not understand what the humans behind the business are intending to do. And yeah, decision tree logic, questionnaires, and the like will help on some of that, but you really sometimes it's those extra minutes in a patient room in the health system that help to find that undiagnosed issue. And it's the same thing when you're dealing with a human working on patent or trademark or other areas of intellectual property, where once you understand what the driver is, you're able to then refine your IP strategy or your IP protection document, your application, to really get to the heart of the matter. We are so we're trying to, and I know that firms and licensees are using AI carefully within closed systems to help with drafting. And so you're sort of getting the best of both worlds. There's a question that's come in about whether we're seeing a shift from protecting true innovation to strategically flooding the system with AI-generated IP, and how should regulators respond? And the answer is that so far we're not seeing a flood. And part of the reason we don't see a flood is you need a human in the loop when it comes to filing of patents and trademarks. If there's a patent that goes, anyone can file in front of the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, but as soon as the reviewers get involved and have questions of those patents or trademark applications, they need to speak to an agent or the individual innovator. And so there's a human who has to be able to answer to whatever has been put into the system. And there's no automatic stamp process in front of the Canadian Intellectual Property Office. They're not just going to be like, oh, that looks cool, and you've used the right buzzwords of the day, be it, you know, dual use technology or Gen AI, or every era has its, and every industry has their buzzwords. Buzzwords mean nothing. What's new is what matters. What's novel? What's to be protected here? And they will look at that very carefully because that is a bargain. You're disclosing in exchange for exclusivity. So SIPO is going to take that very seriously and really comb through to make sure that this isn't puffery. And so we're not seeing that right now because there are still humans in the loop and they're all being AI assisted at this point. But nobody's trying to game the system that way from what we can see. And I remain quite confident that they wouldn't be able to succeed if that was the objective, was to get a whole bunch of patents that they could then use to leverage in one way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Judah. And I think, you both have kind of struck an important piece here too. I mean, there's a lot also globally happening and, sort of the regulatory and sort of legislative sort of frameworks. I mean, there's cases, across, the EU and Japan and UK and other places that are really speaking to at what part, is there that sort of that human in the loop? What is, sort of where's the intervention? What does that look like? I mean, and we can also share some links to folks who are interested in learning more about that. I think one thing also to ask you both before we kind of continue on is it's as much, if we talk about education, we talk about the journey of these innovators, it's as much sort of, if we think of Gen I, them inputting something, in from an idea and something getting spit out as much as it is critical thinking to when you're doing your searching and your own research that perhaps something you are seeing is not correct, right? So you might be using something that's informing you, whether that you've seen a case law, you've seen something that has been generated that is not true. So are you also sort of seeing elements of that there's a reverse part of the education as well, is not just what the Gen I is spitting out that you're inputting, but do your own homework of what you're reading online?
Do you want me to take that first, Jen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah.
I can give you a couple of examples of my first forays into AI. I was looking for a new name for a group I was involved with, and I decided, well, this is perfect for AI. It's creative. So I asked it to do so, and it did. It provided me with a very nice name. So being responsible and wise and old, I then did a follow-up search. Is this already being used? And it absolutely was for exactly the same type of group. Hello, AI chose from the available options. So I think that's an example of how you can get into trouble with it. The other example I'll provide is there was a search I was doing. I use a tool called Perplexity, which I like because it provides little references that I can dig into and see, is that true? Well, a couple of times I found some very soft figures that just because a couple of sites had cited them, that they were now deemed by the AI to be reliable, and must be true. But when you dig down, there's no primary source to those numbers, or it's just AI generated the first reference, which is then cited by the second reference, which is now deemed to be a true delivery. So I am deeply suspicious of AI's research. It is wonderful for time saving, though, I will say.
Thank you, Susan. And Judah, I think, we're getting to a point now where as we talk about risks and, the human side and everything interconnected, organizations across all sectors, right, are being targeted by cyber criminals. We're looking at more increasingly sophisticated frauds, in which they need to sort of be attuned to. From your seat, what are you seeing out there? In terms of what's coming through and how can organizations sort of stay alert and be vigilant and educate themselves along the way in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, this is where we get into the power of AI, which is with great power comes great responsibility, according to Spider-Man. But according to those who do not have some sort of ethical code, there's really real risk and real abuses happening in the system. So, one of the things that we are seeing is given the importance of AI, of intellectual property, we're seeing fraud targeting everyone who is at all tangentially involved in intellectual property. And by everyone, I mean those who have already filed in front of the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, anyone who's got a business. Your public data is being scraped to lead to mass email, phone, and text scams trying to ask you to act urgently to protect something. And in the vast majority of any of these sorts of communications, you should assume fraud by default. So let me show you a little bit about what's happening. So first off, there's lots of credible looking stuff out there. And I'm just going to share my screen again to show you the sort of stuff that we are seeing, because I think it's worth getting a sense of what's there. So um, let me just start with with a fraud example, uh, you'll see here uh, just this page. I've taken a screen clip of what looks like a legitimate area of practice. This is all fraudulent material. Okay. I'm gonna just stop for now. It gives you just a amuse-bouche of the level of sophistication that a web page can look like. It looks legit, right? That looks like professional services firm type of material. It's all fake. Those websites are out there to give the appearance of legitimacy to emails that are being sent using the same business name out to people. And because of AI, you're able to quickly create these websites and iterate on them so that if one gets shut down by the authorities, and we work with the authorities on that effort, they just come back in a different, ugly form. So what we've done is we've started to name and shame, which makes it the window of opportunity for these fraudsters is tighter as a result. But they're just renaming and adding new fake names into their mix to try to get members of the public to fall for these scams. And it's volume. You know, some frauds, like in real estate fraud, where you try to get somebody to buy a property that doesn't exist, that's a whale of a fraud, and you can get millions out of a fraud just one time that way. This is a fraud that's targeting everyone. And if you get a few thousand minnows to bite, you still end up with millions of dollars. So there's real harm here, both net and to individuals, without even getting into the shame that it can make people feel and the time it's taken for people to try to determine, is something a fraud? Is it not a fraud? What should I be doing? And the stress it causes. So we're here to help. Let me show you what we've done. If you go to the Zapata website, which we'll do again, and we'll just come back to the find an agent, just back out into the main page. The second area here we have is called IP scams circulating. And when you go there, we've been monitoring this for over a year and a half now. We started posting naming and shaming fraudsters in early last year, and we've updated even to just a few days ago with the names that we see. So when you get an email from somebody claiming that you need to act right now because your intellectual property filing is about to expire, or you need to act right now because somebody else is about to trademark the name of the business you operate and you're going to be in trouble, but if you use us right now, we'll get you out of this. The first thing that happens is you can Google here. If you Google generally, when an email comes in, you'll probably see our notice in the results. But if you're not sure, just bookmark us. Look at all these names they've used over the last few months. Every time one comes in that we know is a fraud, we just add it. By the way, we've had zero instances of these listed people coming back to us and saying, wait a minute, I'm a legitimate business, take us off. Okay, so when it's on here, you can rest assured. They also switch the names of the people purporting to email you. Sometimes they're even using the names of legitimate lawyers or legitimate patent agents or trademark agents. We don't necessarily put those names in, but if you see a name and it's not here and it's not there, you can't assume green light. You should still do some due diligence. So you should go to that public register. And even if they're legitimately in the public register, you should click on their profile to see where we have indicated they are working. Because sometimes what they've done is they've taken the legitimate name of a professional and they've changed their workplace. If they have a different workplace than what we have on the public register, it's a fraud, or they need to reach us and update their records. But don't be the person who's giving somebody the benefit of the doubt that they haven't told their regulator about a change in their employment. There are various phone numbers being used, and for those of you on the West Coast, you are the epicenter of the fraud. So be on alert. Usually they are purporting to come from a condo on Cordova Street. I know this because they keep using the same address time and again with a 778 number often associated. And these are all the different types of websites we've seen over the past several months. I just gave you the example of one. And as part of your fraud prevention, you can send these around to your team. Send them to your friends and family too. These are examples of the scams we are seeing. And we've got more than one example here. And we've got examples from SIPO. We've got follow-ups pressing you to please, please do something about it. So you can notify us if this happens. But you can also, instead of notifying us, I mean, it helps if you don't see it on our list of stuff. But SIPO has now launched a new IP scam awareness zone, and we're partnered with them on this. And they've got lots of information, and they have a report button too. And what's great about their report button is if you give it to them, they'll let us know, but they'll also let law enforcement know immediately too. So I would say start here now, and we'll find out in due course. But all the red flags, all the information, they've got examples of the scams, examples of what happens to do if you get an email, a text, or a letter, because they're seeing scams that are even broader than ours. They see ones where someone's impersonating SIPO. So they've got examples of this that looks credible, but is a complete fraud. They've got things that claim to come from the intellectual property office itself. They've got the frauds that we've identified. So that should be your first stop. But then if you're wanting to cross-reference against specific names, come to Zapata as well. Or if you've seen a name on our list, you can just disregard the whole thing and move along with your life happily. But you've got to stay vigilant and stay alert because these are changing and they're morphing, and uh, the hallmarks of urgency and risk. And if you don't act now, all those hallmarks of those sophisticated cyber frauds are there, and they're going to be with us. So it's about education, knowledge, and defense more than being able to like truly wipe the scene of it.
Thank you, Judah. And I think also too, for those that are, listening is that, the goal of this is also really to, empower organizations and innovators to do their homework, to be prepared. I mean, there's a lot of noise. It's scary out there, but it's to, the more you can understand, and know that these things, aren't just an afterthought, but a reality in the innovation space and more broadly, it's good. And I think also too, it really shows, I think in the other side of it, as much as the sophistication is also increasing in, the AI and the technology side, also this sort of scam as a business, as a side of things is also is increasing. Previously it was, an organization was going to be hit maybe for, their personnel record or their company records. And now the awareness of how valuable, an IP asset is to an organization and more broadly is also shifted. They're doing their homework too, which is the two sides of the coin as well. So how we can kind of better mobilize against that. I know we've got, a few minutes left kind of before we close out. And as we invite kind of folks to a question, there was one that also came in. This was a little bit around sort of Susan's point, and perhaps, I don't know, Judah, from your lens, if there's something you wanted to add as well around, typically if you see grant or there's other types of funding. It's not just grant. There could be other non-dilutive or other sort of access to funding applications. Using all funding available. Most agencies require sort of this co-pay by the entrepreneur to require the skin in the game. Do you have sort of thoughts on that? And I mean, people are asking about appropriate portions, but, maybe just more sort of thoughts in general around the innovator having the skin in the game. And is there something based on more business maturity and what you're seeing out there would be great, your perspective.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing, and we're sort of in the first decade of this sort of effort in Canada, but we're seeing this increased effort at targeted government supports specific to intellectual property, to not just educate people about the importance, but to support them on the actual strategies and filings of individual business. So this goes beyond the historical opportunities of tax benefits through SR&ED or elsewhere. So it's an interesting policy shift, not just at the federal level, but provincially as well for some spaces. I think at the same time, uh, the regulator wouldn't have specific views about how you might do this. But speaking personally, you can see how a government would want to make sure that whoever is involved has skin in the game. that they're not just chasing free money, they're using a service that's being offered to enable that business to compete and to gain a net advantage. And so they should be putting some funding down to accomplish that as well. So I think from a public policy perspective, it makes some sense. And it certainly makes sense on the longer term because you're going to be the net beneficiary of it at the end of the day. This is going to be your intellectual property developed for you and in part by you together with professionals, and that you are going to hopefully be able to grow your business through. So you've got skin in the game. I think it's important to recognize the skin in the game changes over time. So some people see free money and run to it. And look, we all love grants. I mean, there are employment grants, hire a student. Well, if you're going to hire a student, you need to supervise the student, right? So there is time and resource in any grant program. So you might be able to look at IP, but if you're not ready to look at IP, do your homework first to get up to speed on what IP is all about, then go bring in the professionals. But also know that, there may be a support up front for filing. You then need to maintain that filing, their annual filing fees. You may decide that you need to file further in the future or file in other markets. You might need a professional without funding available to update your IP strategy part of your business plan for you, or your standalone IP strategy, depending on how you've sliced and diced it. Those require funding. So you need to talk to whoever you're working with about how much will these types of things cost me when we're outside of the funding regime where there are government supports. Because one thing we are starting to see is some frustration eke out in our ecosystem where somebody has done something at 10 cents on the dollar, but they haven't really accounted for the fact that at some point they're on for 100 cents on the dollar. And that's a pain point if you haven't started to think about it, or if you didn't realize that, there are ongoing costs to truly having skin in the game. So you just want to reflect on that and also ask your professionals, okay, so this is going to take me for like 2 years out. But if this stuff becomes hourly rate work, what's your current rate? And is that going to be the rate down the road? Or do I not know what that future state is going to be? It's not professionals trying to rip off people, by some bait and switch. It's that we've all seen inflation. We know that there's a competitive market out there for professional services. We've seen it in legal, we've seen it in agency work. Rates change over time. So have those conversations up front with your professionals to understand what you're truly getting in for the longer term.
Thank you, Susan. I'll turn it to you as well. I mean, from your lens, from the programming and the funding, you started us at the beginning with this. Are there, some additional points you'd like to share on this approach and that to what Judah said?
Well, I think actually thinking in terms of being a parent, as I hear Judah's put a lot of these things very beautifully, but I think as in a more visceral way, I would say that these grants are really just a helper. Like this isn't the way it's going to be. And it's important for you or the clients or the companies to have that in mind. This is just a temporary helper. And then, as Judah says, you're gonna go on to the big boy stuff or the big person stuff, and you're gonna be paying the hourly rate. So I do think it's good having the copay. I think it helps. It's like a training program for the company to get to the point where, yeah, now I can take care of this myself. And I know I'm going to have to, and I'll be prepared for it, and I won't go bankrupt when the granting is over.
Yeah, 100%. It really kind of speaks to, what we started earlier with is you kind of that journey, right? Like there are so many multi-layers to this for the organizations, and that, IP is part of the business strategy, that is part of the IP strategy, that is part of the growth strategy. Like everything is intertwined. So I think you both have really sort of, hit on, the different things that to be mindful of. There is lots of opportunity, and to this discussion, there is also lots of opportunity from also funding supports, education supports. I mean, we'll share some of this also after, but there's also that onus from the innovator and that lens to kind of say, okay, where am I going with this? What works for me now and doesn't? And maybe something, they also have to be really kind of lockstep in that journey. So as we're kind of coming up to time, and we may still get a few questions if they come in afterwards, we'll send your way kind of for some from comment. What is one takeaway that each of you would like to leave with the audience, on how to take control, of their IP and to use it for strategic advantage? Judah, I'll start with you, and then Susan will have you close us out.
I'd say just remember that it's for you. It's your IP. You own it, you live by it, hopefully you grow through it. You will get advice, but just remember, and professionals are paid to give advice and try their best to assist, but there will be different opinions sometimes. And so you need to listen and reflect and consider what is best and then move forward. And there's risk behind that, but just know that this is part of running the business is to accept that risk and do your best through this and make sure that you know that it's your IP to manage.
Susan, final thoughts?
It's so Judith said it so perfectly, and I think that's the most important thing we can say is that, and I would say don't take your hands off the steering wheel, because it is your business and you are getting advice, but you're the one who's going to be living with the outcome.
Thank you both so much. I know amidst your busy calendars to carve out some time with us today to share your insights, to inspire all of us that are on this call and more broadly in the ecosystem to really sort of champion these visions that they have for wanting to build these amazing solutions, not just for Canada, but for the world, and where we can sort of really showcase the prowess that we have here in this country. So with that, I would like to thank you both once again for joining us, to our speakers as well, and to our audience. That's it from us for Digital for today. We look forward to seeing you all at our next webinar session. And as mentioned at the beginning, we will be sending out some supporting links and information, some of the things that have been covered on this call today, as well as the webinar in due time in the coming week or so. And at any time, feel free to reach out to all of us and how we can sort of help to support you on your journey. So go forth and innovate, and